good afternoon. This is George Yates, and this is Justice for All. Welcome to our show, and we're going to be spending the next hour with an author. His name is James Ardaiz. He's a former prosecutor and judge, and he's a presiding justice of the California 5th District Court of Appeal. And his book is called Hands Through Stone, and it's a fascinating story that was written actually based on true events, because Mr. Ardaiz was a chief of the Homicide Division of the Fresno County District Attorney's Office when he was a young lawyer, and he had an opportunity to get involved in this case. And the book that comes from this is Hands Through Stone. And it's the story of how a fellow masterminded a murder from while he was in Folsom Prison. I'm a former prosecutor. I'm fascinated by your experience as a prosecutor and as a homicide prosecutor is really amazing. As a lawyer, I'm reading your book, and it's got a real true detective flavor to it. It's a fascinating read.
Well, thank you.
So Mr. Ardaiz is here with us today. His name is James Ardaiz, and really, this book really recounts events. It's a murder, actually a murder in a market in Fresno County in 1980, and you began investigating the murder as a young prosecutor, chief of the Homicide Division, and it led you to a fascinating, a prosecution of this fellow Clarence Ray Allen. Tell our listeners about really what this book is about and how you came to write it.
Well, this book is about a series of murders that took place in California starting back in 1974, separated by a period of 6 years. At that time, I was a young deputy district attorney, just out of law school, handling my first large cases, and I prosecuted a case against Clarence Allen involving the murder of a young woman named Mary Sue Yates. The Yates case was a fascinating murder case in which her body was never found. Allen was convicted of first-degree murder and was sent to Folsom Prison. 6 years later, I was chief of homicide in the district attorney's office in Central California when I went to the scene of a multiple murder at a market that was also involved in the murder of Mary Sue Yates. 3 young people were executed. A fourth was grievously wounded. And as a result of that, my investigators and I were able to conclude that Clarence Allen, who had been responsible for the murder of Mary Sue Yates, had sent somebody out of Folsom Prison to kill witnesses in retaliation for testifying against him. And among those was a young man at the market. The other people that were injured were simply employees who were unfortunately at the wrong place at the wrong time. And as a result of our investigation, Allen was executed in 2006, 26 years later. The book is about those murders. It's about the men and women who pursued the investigations, and it's about my perceptions in following the cases and trying to write in a way that would allow a reader to understand a major murder investigation and also to see what I saw through my eyes at the time of the execution.
These you start the reader at the Franz Market, which is the scene of the 3 murders of the young people, and the fourth person who is shot and runs away from the scene is not killed. And then you back up the book backs up to, I guess, 1974 and discusses the Yates murder. Now, the Yates young lady was killed not by Mr. Allen, but at his direction by another person, right?
Yes, that's right. Allen had a gang of people that well, he had a gang, I guess is the easiest way to put it. He operated all through the Central Valley. He had a security agency. And at the same time, he was using the people in the security agency to burglarize stores that he was providing protection for. And one of the men that was in that gang was a man by the name of Lee Furrow. And Mary Sue Kitts was involved with Allen's son, and subsequently, because she became aware of issues with respect to the murder, Allen, and began to talk to people, Allen directed that she be murdered, and he forced Lee Furrow to do it on pain of his own death, which he did.
Yeah, the account in your book of the interrogation of this Furrow defendant is quite good. Your description of how detectives go about making the I mean, a lot of us that watch TV, or those of us that aren't attorneys and watch TV, and they wonder, how do these police go about these interrogations? And so many people have these misconceptions about the reading of rights and so on. And your description of the interrogation of Lee Furrow and how cops go about doing it, because there's no one size fits all to any of these interrogations, is a really very fascinating and educational description of how cops go about their business, and how you as a prosecutor go about working with the cops to do these investigations. And Furrow was an interesting case, how they came in and they made him comfortable, and they ultimately got him to confess to strangling Mary Sue Kitts, and describe how he was ordered to do it by Clarence Ray Allen. You can't help but see parallels between this fellow Allen and the Charles Manson murders, can you?
No, you can't. Allen, it's kind of hard for people to understand the type of individuals that attach themselves to what I will call charismatic leaders, including somebody like Manson. They create these followers. They tend to be a certain type of individual from a psychological standpoint. And, it's always fascinated me the way these followers respond to people like Allen. And Manson is very similar. The parallel you're drawing is very accurate.
Yeah, because now Allen seems to control his followers more with fear. Manson seemed to pick people that followed him much as a guru and someone that a spiritual leader, and he convinced his followers to do it because of whatever the hippie trip that they were on. Whereas Allen did it in a more used fear that if they didn't go about doing that, they would be killed. He accomplished the same thing, but in a different manner.
He did. He was kind of like what I would call an alpha wolf. Although the people that followed him, they looked up to him. I mean, you have to bear in mind that the value systems of folks like this are foreign to those that the average person holds, and they were afraid of him, but at the same time, they kept themselves attached to him. I mean, he provided an identity for them, a sense of worth, as that may be, and also a living for them. So it's very strange to see people that would do things like this. It's hard for the average person to understand it.
If you've just joined us, we're discussing the book Hands Through Stone, How Clarence Ray Allen Masterminded Murder from Behind Folsom's Prison Walls. And it's by James Ardaiz, and James Ardaiz is a former prosecutor and judge and was presiding justice of the California Court of Appeals. He's retired from that position now and lives in California, and wrote this book in 2012 based on really these murders from 1980 and earlier. You're an excellent writer. This is one of the best written books, and it does read like a mystery thriller. You pick up the book. It starts with the murders at Franz Market. It backtracks to 1974. It talks about the murder of Mary Sue Kitts and the way that the investigators tracked down the Lee Furrow fellow. Describes the robberies that the Clarence Ray Allen gang engaged themselves in. And then it does read somewhat like a very well written police procedural. Your knowledge of how homicide detectives go about their work is just remarkable.
Well, thank you. I wanted to write a book. Well, you have a legal background, and probably like you, I get frustrated when I watch television shows that to a certain extent misrepresent what actually happens. I wanted to write something that allowed people to see things from the perspective of the men and women inside from beginning to end. And I also wanted to write something that was nonfiction, but was written like a mystery story, because that's really what this was. So it's structured that way, although it is, of course, extremely accurate, and the representations, with minor exceptions as to what everybody said, are taken directly from transcripts.
So we sort of give away the plot of it. Clarence Ray Allen is in prison while you're going about a lot of this investigation. Is he ultimately successfully prosecuted for the murders of the three young people at Franz Market?
He is. I don't spend a lot of time on that aspect of it because, as you know, as both a prosecutor and a defense attorney, the vast bulk of what happens in a criminal case occurs prior to trial. It's the investigation, how the case is put together. So determining the motive, determining the evidence, that really takes place at the front end. Ultimately, of course, yes, he was convicted. He was sentenced to death. And one of the things that the book talks about, and it's not a book about the death penalty, it's a book about a case that leads to that. And the fact that it took 26 years from 1980 to 2006, it's about that, and how people react to that, and the fact that men and women devoted, for most people, what would be an entire career to finding justice for these people, the parents of the victims.
And Clarence Ray Allen, was he in prison that entire time?
Yes, he was. He was in prison. I convicted him of first-degree murder in 1976, and he was of Mary Sue Kitts, and he was in prison that entire time, both Folsom and San Quentin, until his execution in 2006.
So the basic premise is he kills this Mary Sue Kitts through the actions of Lee Furrow, and you use some witnesses in the course of that trial of a young man named Brian, I believe, and then there's a young lady involved, the little blonde young lady. I don't know all the names of the characters in the book, but there's these three people that are killed by this other gunman. That was all retribution, wasn't it? When those people, now when you first go to that scene at Franz Market, it looks like a robbery, and then there's a murder of three people. But in fact, those murders were revenge murders, weren't they?
They were. When you're an experienced homicide detective, or in this case, my experience as a homicide prosecutor, you can pretty much walk into a crime scene and look it over and have a fairly good idea of what happened. And motives are usually relatively transparent. When I walked into the market at Franz Market, it was a storage room area, although fairly large, saw these young people. it clearly to me was not a robbery gone bad. It was an execution, and it was illogical. You don't really see that kind of thing in your typical robbery, and the amount of, for want of a better term, carnage was horrific. And I walked through the store, and as I walked through the store, I saw various clues that told me that the person who committed the murder was he was acting differently than I would have expected. He actually cut himself. He used a sawed-off 12-gauge shotgun and a single-shot break open. And anybody that uses a shotgun knows that when you do that, one of the dangers you have is that you will clip the webbing between your thumb and forefinger, which is what he did. And so there was a path of blood, drops of blood through the store. And at the time, there had been a rumor about the storekeeper, the owner of the store, keeping a safe with $25,000 in it in a meat locker. And that's where the blood drops went. So I knew that this person was aware of this. I also knew the rumor was untrue. But that had played a central role in the murder of Mary Sue Kitts. And my investigator that night, a man by the name of Bill Martin, a superb investigator, he and I, we stood outside the store thinking about the Mary Sue Kitts murder, but never dreaming that there would be any relationship to it. We were primarily concerned of the kind of person that was on the loose, that would kill 3 kids the way he killed them and shoot a 4th, leave them for dead.
Who was the person that actually did the shooting? What was his name, and what was his motivation for working for Allen and committing these murders?
His name was Billy Ray Hamilton, and Billy Ray Hamilton was a cellmate and associate of Clarence Allen at Folsom Prison. Billy Ray Hamilton was it's hard to describe him. I mean, he's the kind of man that if you saw him walking down the street, most people would clear a path, because it wasn't that he wasn't ugly. He was just a frightening looking man. I mean, the way he was built and his expression. And basically what happened was that he became, for want of a better term, another minion of Clarence Allen. And Allen told him about the money, and the deal essentially was Hamilton kill these witnesses, and Hamilton would get the money. So it was a quid pro quo and a favor to what he referred to as the old man, which was Clarence Allen. So that when he got out, he immediately came to Fresno and set out to commit this crime.
Now, Clarence Ray Allen, describe him. Now, he was executed in 2006, and was he the last person executed in California to date?
Yes, he was the last man executed. At that time, I was the sitting judge. I was the presiding justice of the Court of Appeal for Central California. And at that time, I think, as far as I know, I was the only sitting judge ever to witness an execution, at least in modern times. The Hamilton was also in San Quentin at that point, awaiting his own order of execution, although ultimately he died before that could be imposed. But Allen was the last man executed in California.
And they were both tried for capital murder in separate trials?
Correct.
And did you prosecute Clarence Allen for the capital murder?
No, I arrested him and I handled the case up until trial, and then the district attorney's office was disqualified in the Allen murder because in the Mary Sue Kitts murder, Allen's defense attorney had subsequently become the assistant district attorney, and so there was a conflict. So the attorney general took over the Allen trial, and shortly thereafter, I became a judge in California.
And who prosecuted Billy Ray Hamilton?
Yes.
The same office, the AG's office, I guess, had to prosecute him as well.
No, the Fresno County District Attorney's Office prosecuted Hamilton. There was no conflict of interest there.
So now, Clarence Ray Allen, describe him physically, and what kind of a man in size, and what was it about him that made him such a charismatic leader, able to get people to do his bidding right up to the point of murdering somebody?
He was a man about 5'10", average build, gray hair, glasses. He looked like somebody's grandfather. As a matter of fact, he was somebody's grandfather. He was an average-looking man, but what was distinctive about him were his eyes and the way he carried himself. He just had dead eyes. Is the only way I could describe him. He had a way of looking at people that frightened most people. There was a real coldness about him. He never talked. When he would, to the extent that I was aware of him talking to the people that followed him, he always did it in a way that intimidated people by implying how cold-blooded he was. And people were terrified of him. Even those that were closely associated with him were terrified of him. There were substantial indications that he had acted as a hired hitman. There were indications that he had eliminated witnesses before. And I have every reason to believe that he, in fact, did. And he would remind people of that. And the folks that were around him, one of the most difficult things was to make them more afraid of me than they were of him in order to get them to talk.
The investigators in this case, you described them in glowing terms as to the professionalism they bring to the job. Whatever became of them? Did they continue? Where are the investigators? I think is Blade.
Art Christensen, who was referred to in the book as Blade. He was and that's because he just was this tall, very thin man who tended to wear kind of cowboy clothing, and it was a little bit of I guess the way I would describe him is a little dour looking, but he was, he affected kind of a cowboy demeanor, one of the toughest investigators I ever saw. And Art passed away earlier this year. His partner was a much younger man by the name of Tom Lean, and he looked a little bit like what your impression would be of a California surfer. Blonde hair and Hawaiian shirts. Both of them very tough cops. My investigator, Bill Martin, Bill, about 6 feet tall, African-American, former homicide investigator, extremely adept investigator, very, very good at interrogation, as was Art Christensen. My other investigator was a man by the name of Ernie Duran, and all of the investigators in the case were extremely capable. Tom Lean, after he retired, went on to head up the police academy. Ernie Duran went to work for the Department of Justice, where he became the head of the office in San Diego, and is currently the head of security for a national rent-a-car company. Bill Martin, unfortunately, passed away about 10 years ago. So those are the men and women that, and there were a number of folks that performed interim investigative functions.
How in the world? How in the world was Clarence Ray Allen successfully prosecuted? I mean, he was in prison. This other fellow, Hamilton, did the killing, and I'm sure Allen made no confession. He was smart enough when he was questioned to not confess. How could you? How did you actually connect the dots in this book, Hands Through Stone? And I'm here, if you've just joined us, with James Ardaiz, the writer of Hands Through Stone. How you successfully prosecuted a man in prison for a murder committed outside of prison. How'd you do it without a confession from him?
Well, you ask a very good question. And the way that I did it was, as you know, the first thing that you do in any homicide investigation is you start to backtrack looking at motive and people that have been in contact. There was a woman that we found at the scene of the murder, and she was covered with blood, and for some reason, and that's about the only way I can put it, for some reason, I had a suspicion about her, and she had been left behind at the scene of the murder, and her name was Connie Barbeau, and I had a drug screen done on her. And while she was at the hospital, because she was covered with blood, and we couldn't tell if she'd been injured initially, we thought she was a victim. When the fourth young man who was shot at point blank with a 12-gauge shotgun was able to tell us that a woman participated. So we suspected her. We found a .38 in the flush tank of a toilet in France Market. So we began to backtrack on her and found that her associate, that she had been around with a man by the name of, had gone by the nickname of Blue Boy, which we immediately realized was a prison nickname. But back then, we didn't have all the advantages of computers and cell phones and all the rest of that. So we could not do much in the middle of the night to try and backtrack on that. But we began to backtrack on Blue Boy, and what we found was, because in a murder investigation, the first 48 to 72 hours are extremely concentrated, we found that Connie Barbeau was a methamphetamine user whose connection, her dealer, was a young man by the name of Kenny Allen. And, of course, I knew that Kenny Allen was Clarence Ray Allen's son. And still, we did not realize there was a connection. It was not something that just naturally occurred to us. And we hit Kenny Allen's house the next morning and interrogated him. And slowly but surely, by that time, we began to fill out the connections, and we ultimately found out through Kenny Allen's wife who Blue Boy was, which was Billy Ray Hamilton. By that time, we were able to backtrack Billy Ray Hamilton, and sure enough, he linked up to Folsom Prison, and then it didn't take us very long before we began to suspect that there was a direct connection between Clarence Allen and Billy Ray Hamilton as we talked to prison authorities. And then it became a question of making the case against Allen because, as you know, using accomplices becomes very difficult if you don't have direct evidence. So that's essentially how we began to put together the web around Clarence Allen.
And you never had to use Billy Hamilton as a witness against Clarence Allen?
No, I wouldn't have done it. You know, frankly, you're talking about one of the most difficult decisions a prosecutor makes. I mean, I let Lee Furrow plead guilty to second-degree murder and the killing of Mary Sue Kitson. He was the actual murderer because I decided that it was more important to get Allen. When you were looking at Billy Ray Hamilton, he had executed 3 young people. There's just no way that I would have given him a break. He never talked. I never thought he would talk. When he was arrested, I I didn't even come down because I was that confident that he wouldn't say a word, and he didn't.
So it was all circumstantial evidence or mostly
every piece of circumstantial evidence. Yes.
Wow.
A very tough case.
Wow. And the jury not only convicted, but then in a separate proceeding ruled on death.
Yes, and by the time you get to the punishment phase in a capital trial, the people that are sentenced to death by juries tend to have a lot of commonality in terms of their record. And here you had Allen with prior convictions and conviction for first-degree murder, and Billy Ray Hamilton, multiple convictions for armed robbery and executing premeditated murder of 3 kids, and they really were kids. They really were teenagers, except for Brian Schledowitz, who was in his early 20s. So there was no sympathy there. There was nothing sympathetic about any of them.
And any argument that someone should get life in prison is not a very good argument when your defendant has already been found guilty of murder once by coercing someone else to do it from a distance, and here he is in prison, and then ordering the murder of 4 more people and succeeding with 3 of them. So the jury has really no choice. Once they've determined that he's done it, they say, we can't let this man live. He's liable to have a few more people killed while he's in prison. So the future dangerousness.
Well, as a matter of fact, I'm sorry to interrupt, but as a matter of fact, Billy Ray Hamilton, on the night of Clarence Allen's execution, when I walked out of San Quentin, the Attorney General followed me and told me that Billy Ray Hamilton, that the prison authorities believed that he had killed 3 more men while he was on death row.
Wow.
And of course, when Hamilton was arrested, we found the hit list in his wallet with the names of all of the witnesses with check marks next to their names. So we knew the intention was to kill people purely for purposes of retaliation.
And this was Billy Ray Hamilton doing this, or Clarence Allen doing this?
Well, the list came from Allen, although it was a printed list, and Hamilton had it in his wallet.
So he was continuing to try to kill people from prison even after the Franz Market killings.
Right. Billy Ray Hamilton was sent out with a specific purpose of eliminating every person that was on that list.
How many other people were killed or successfully executed as a result of that?
Nobody else was killed after we arrested Billy Ray Hamilton, and of course the other people on the list, some of whom included law enforcement officers, were immediately notified because we had no idea whether there was more than one person out there. But it was Billy Ray Hamilton. Hamilton ultimately died of stomach cancer before his execution.
So all these people, the 3 girls there were the 3 people that were killed at Franz Market, and all these other people on the list, did they all come from this prosecution of Ray Allen for or Clarence Ray Allen, I should say, because there's a great basketball player named Ray Allen, so we'll call him Clarence Allen. So this was all arising from the successful prosecution for the murder of Mary Kitts?
That's correct.
All the law enforcement. I mean, all right. That's what an evil fellow, this fellow Clarence Allen.
He was a very evil man, and but you know, I understand you've been a prosecutor and a defense attorney, and you know that as time passes, the perspective that people have of individuals who commit these acts, it kind of evolves. And the more detached you are from the actual murders or horrible crimes, the less you identify with the crime and the more you identify with the individual. You see these people, people kind of lose sight of the outrage. And when you have these protracted periods of time, like in California, 26 years. Basically, when Allen was executed, he was an old man. And he's also the oldest man executed in California. He was executed on his birthday. Looking at him, part of what I wanted people to understand is what it was like to look at somebody like that. I mean, I'd seen it all. I'd seen both murders. I'd seen the murder scenes. I'd interrogated the witnesses, the defendants, and I prosecuted a lot of murder cases in my career, handled a lot of murder cases. So seeing him, I was curious as to my reaction to him. I taught death penalty litigation to judges in California for years, and I realized that I was so far removed from it that it was hard for me to feel the kind of outrage that I did 26 years before. And it gave me a little perspective on what happens with the passage of time and how people can kind of begin to feel a certain amount of, for want of a better term, sympathy. That's hard for people to understand, but you look at it, and your reaction is just simply different. I mean, the man that I saw getting into the execution chamber at San Quentin was just an old man who was overweight, and
the old
he was a lot different.
There was I had a guest, April Moore, on my show earlier this year, and she wrote a book about the Folsom when Folsom hung people, and
Yes.
and the last hanging, I believe, was in 1937, and there were a number of men that were executed in the gallows during that period of time. I think we're talking about from about 1895 to 1937. And none of those, I think the longest they went was probably 3 years from the date of conviction to the date of the hanging. And some of the executions were just within several months of the conviction. And I think that when you had that kind of sort of swift justice, I think it's more fitting. But when you wait 26 years to execute somebody, by that time the person that's being executed is a completely different person than the person that committed the crime. And as you say, the outrage is no longer there, or certainly has mellowed quite a bit in the passage of time.
Well, it is. It does, and it's interesting. I mean, the men that I was with that night, three of my investigators, there was Tom Lean and Harry Masuko and Ernie Duran. At that point, Bill had passed away, and we didn't get together that often. We saw each other maybe once a year. So that night, after the execution, it was interesting because we didn't talk much about the execution. We talked about why we had made the effort to be there, and I called Art Christensen when I got back from San Quentin, and Art was not that well, and Art had been a homicide investigator, doing purely homicide for over 20 years, had seen a lot. And I told him, I said, Art, I guess I can admit this to you. I really didn't want to watch this. It isn't an opposition to the death penalty. It's just, I just didn't want to watch it. And he said to me, well, there is a point where you've just seen so much death, you don't want to see it anymore. It doesn't make any difference what the justification is. You just don't want to see it anymore. And I suppose that's true. You just kind of reach a point where it doesn't make any difference who it is. I can be objective about it, but and I don't oppose the death penalty, but I, felt no desire to be there and watch it. More than anything, what I learned and what I tell people is that when you let these cases drag on this way, they have an extremely detrimental effect on the families. The families themselves suffer more than the defendant does. And people don't realize that. But it's poisonous. It's like, every day there's never any resolution for them.
I recall a murder case that I defended. I left the Commonwealth Attorney's Office here in Virginia Beach, and I defended a particularly horrible execution-style robbery murder. And it was of a female desk clerk, and the husband, the widower, would come to the court every day, every hearing, and weep audibly through the entire proceeding. And it was just I've never seen anything I heard or really in all my career something quite like that. But how he could continue to come to court even and have that kind of grief and still show up, but he did. But tell me a minute about your career. Is pretty fascinating, Jim. And if you've just joined us, I'm with James Ardaiz. He's the author of Hands Through Stone. He's a California judge, prosecutor. You went to the University of California at the Berkeley Hastings School of Law. You got out. Were you always a prosecutor? Did you ever do defense work? And you went onto the bench. Tell us about your career. You're a phenomenal writer, very talented writer. I mean, this is not just some memoir. This was really well done. This is as good as any true crime fiction book out there. And anybody that's listening to this show should go pick up a copy of Hands Through Stone, because it reads like a better than a lot of, because it's accurate. You know that it's the real deal. So, tell us about your career and how you ended up where you are today.
Well, when I graduated from law school, I actually did work for a very short period of time in San Francisco for a plaintiff's firm. And it just wasn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a trial lawyer, so I came back. I was married, and my wife is from Fresno. As she's actually from a small town outside of Fresno, and I'm from Fresno. So we came back here, and I went to work in the DA's office. I was very fortunate because I had been asked to do legal work. As you know, lawyers tend to get kind of reputations when it comes to legal issues as opposed to trial lawyers. And so I had handled a number of complicated legal cases and motion work, and ended up working for the assistant district attorney on a major white-collar corruption case, and moved up quickly in the office, much more rapidly than you would normally expect, and I ended up becoming a major felony prosecutor. From there, handled the 7th death penalty case in California, and then from there became the chief of homicide fairly young. I was 28 and in that position, and then I went from there. In 1980, I had the opportunity to become a municipal court judge, and so I did, and that was kind of in parallel with me handling the Franz Market murder case. Became a judge, became presiding judge in the municipal court, moved to the Superior Court in 1985, and then became presiding judge in the Superior Court, and then moved to the Court of Appeal for Central California in 1988, and became the administrative presiding justice, which is the chief judge, in 1994. Taught at the California Judicial College, taught and wrote articles about the death penalty and about judicial decision-making. Sat on the Supreme Court by assignment, and that pretty much was the span of my career. Became heavily involved in California policy issues, things like 3 strikes, sentencing, taught and wrote on concepts of sentencing and crime prevention, and ultimately kind of segued into writing articles. And I wrote an article about the execution, and there was such a strong reaction to it that I decided to do what I'd always wanted to do, which was to write a book, and that's how Hands Through Stone came into being.
So do you have another book that you're going to write? Because you've got a real talent for it.
Well, thank you. My new book is, I actually do have a new book called Night Whispers. I'm hopeful it'll be out around the first of the year. It's currently in the final stages of edit. And so, and as a matter of fact, they're doing a screenplay on Hands Through Stone at the moment. And so it's, in many respects, it's kind of surprising the turn my career has taken.
Now, they're going to do a screenplay on it. So for a movie.
For a movie, yes.
Now, Night Whispers, is that non or fiction, or is that novel?
Night Whispers is fiction, but I stick to what I know. So it's a murder mystery.
Of course. I'm sort of fascinated. Is that pretty much the norm in California, that every murder prosecution or murder investigation, I want to say, that a prosecutor is assigned to that and is actually on the crime scene at such an early stage? Because, in our area, that does not ordinarily work that way. I don't think that prosecutors it's usually detectives or, police that are there, and the prosecutors are kind of brought into it a little bit later. But you're first guy on the scene. Is that pretty much the way it works across the board in California?
No, it's not. Back in 1975, 76, we had a rampage of gangland slayings in California. Everybody was dealing with essentially Mexican prison gangs, what we call the Mexican Mafia and the Nuestra Familia. And the murder rate in California and in the Central Valley spiked to where it was actually the highest per capita in the country. And when I became the chief of homicide, that was what confronted me, was this horrendous murder rate. My job was to attempt to deal with it. So what I decided I would do, because we were not making a lot of murders. I mean, people don't understand that murder has the highest resolution rate of any crime, but it's really, in virtually every community in major metropolitan areas, less than 50%. So when they tell you you don't get away with murder, that's not true. And so what I decided I would do is I would put a prosecutor. I created a special team of prosecutors and put that team of prosecutors in every homicide scene. So they were right there with the police, right there assisting. They would take the case straight up from the crime scene to prosecution, and I was trying to resolve our murder rate and trying to resolve our successful prosecution rate. And so we went from a successful rate of prosecution of probably 75% to 100%. And of our, the ones that we were able to make, we increased our solution rates. And I did that by putting prosecutors there, and that's what I taught other prosecutors in California, a vertical prosecution system with homicide. So in that respect, that was something that is very different. And I required every prosecutor that handled homicides to go to the autopsies, to essentially take active involvement with our investigators and with law enforcement authorities. So it was a period of time to get cooperation, but it was unusual, but it had very positive results.
And what was it that the lawyer brought to the table, so to speak, that assisted the prosecution, the investigation itself, that was better than had the lawyers not been involved from the beginning?
Well, for one thing, our search warrants and our arrest warrants, we didn't lose them anymore. Normally, police officers are doing search warrants and arrest warrants. Those search warrants and arrest warrants were prepared with and under the supervision of prosecutors who were trained with respect to that. Interrogations, we made sure that the interrogations were handled in a way that we weren't going to lose any Miranda cases. And the cases, the prosecutors that were brought in viewed every crime from the standpoint of how it's going to look in court. What do I need? Closing the door on questions with respect to motive. And these people were specialists in homicide. That's what they did, murder cases.
Yeah,
which are completely different. So that's what we use. We use murder specialists.
And that's really true. So many times a police officer might go out and make the collar, do the investigation, kind of put it all together in a jacket, and say, "Here it is, it's done." And then by the time it gets to the prosecutor a week later or whatever, he's going, "Well, what about this? What about this? And what about this?" And as you said earlier, the trail has gone cold. You need to do it within the 72 hours. By this point, it's maybe a week or two later, and the prosecutor's saying, "Did you do this or did you do that?" But if you've got a prosecutor on the scene right there already seeing the problems in getting a conviction, then that little extra bit of work is going to be done at the time that it needs to be done rather than later when the trail's gone cold.
Well, and also our prosecutors established a rapport with victims' families. There was a trust factor that existed. Our homicide investigators had relationships within the community. We had, diversity in our investigators, so that in different ethnic aspects of the community, we had people that could talk to people, and our prosecutors got used to dealing with murder.
How did the older cops take to having a prosecutor come on the scene and maybe sort of kind of be in charge of it? I guess that probably took a little bit of time to get everybody accustomed to the new.
You're not kidding. The old cops did not like it at all.
No.
But the way that I had everybody behave is the investigators from the DA's office would take the lead. So they'd been around, and I would tell the young deputies coming in, they were experienced felony prosecutors, but murder was not their specialization. I would tell them, you keep your mouth shut, stay there, and just be available, and don't try and tell any old cop what to do. And eventually they'll get used to you, and they'll make use of you, and when they trust you, you're going to be fine. And that's how we did it. But I never tried to tell any old cop how to do anything.
Yeah, and then after that young prosecutor had handled one or two and successfully prosecuted a few, he'd earned his respect from the other cops, and then it started to work, I'm sure, over time. That's
how it worked. You're exactly right.
Well, this has been a really great time. I really enjoyed this conversation with you, Jim. I think we're close to the end of our hour here, so I'm going to go ahead and remind our listeners here that we've been chatting for the last hour or so with author James Ardaiz, who's a former homicide prosecutor in California in Fresno, and then later a judge, a Superior Court judge, and then a Court of Appeals judge in California. He's retired, and he's written this great book, which you need to go out and get. It's called Hands Through Stone. It's available on Amazon and wherever books are sold. And they're making a major, I guess, some kind of either a made-for-TV movie or they're writing a screenplay for it right now. So that's going to be very interesting. It's about how Clarence Ray Allen masterminded murder from behind Folsom's prison walls. And Mr. Ardaiz has another book coming out in the year coming up called Night Whispers. So your new career is going to be a lot of fun, it looks like.
Well, I hope so. And I thank you for the opportunity to talk to you and your listeners.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on the show. And you have a great day, all right, Mr. Ardaiz? And hopefully when you get Night Whispers in the can and it comes out, we'll maybe have you back on the show next year.
That sounds great. You take care.
All right, thank you. And that's the end of our segment here on Justice for All. I'm George Yates. We've spent the last hour with James Ardaiz, and the book is Hands Through Stone. And this is Justice for All. We're going to go to some CBS News, and you enjoy your day. Thank you very much.